I'm Terry Kolath. I'm here today with Professor Adrian Kehr. We have reached session 5 of our History of the United States to 1815 with Professor Adrian Kehr. Hello, Adrian.
Nice to be back, Terry.
So why are we stopping at 1815?
My own personal interest in American history declines a little bit because it becomes not so much history after 1815 as the run-up to the Civil War, which is a very painful subject, and then post-war America, which is also a painful subject, and then we get into not so much history as recent politics, First War, Second World War, and so it changes its nature. I'm fascinated by American history as to how America changed from a group of colonies into the powerhouse that it was to be. That's the exciting thing for me, because most revolutions are disastrous. If you look at revolutions around the world, the English Civil War, for instance, the bloodletting and the difficulties that led to for the next 50, 60 years. You look at the French Revolution, the bloodletting, the settling of scores, the rise of Napoleon, the catastrophes of Waterloo. I mean, normally revolutions are disaster, spell disaster, but the War of Independence was a stunning success, and America came out of it really flying, and it's interesting studying why that is.
Sure, and that's what you're going to do now, the challenges of peace. Okay, we did it.
We did it. Great, good news. We won the war, we're independent, now what do we do? And of course you get clever people who said, well, yes, we've got our control of our country, but we haven't got any money. They'd borrowed money to fight the War of Independence, and so they were bankrupt. And so we first of all have to have a concept of a bank and pay off our debt, and so these new concepts of running your own show start to appear. But you have to remember, at this time, these were 13 colonies, all with their own governor, all with their own capital, and their own way of running their state. In the South, there was cotton, there was slavery, there was tobacco. In the North, there was manufacturing and shipbuilding and farming. And so there was not a commonality apart from the desire to get rid of George III. They didn't hate the English, they just hated the king.
Right, and the geography, for one thing. I mean, how it affected everything.
Yes. So there was rivalry between, if we're going to have a central government, should it be a strong federal government, or should it be the states have the power and we have to have somebody who covers all the states? And this debate is very well documented in the Federalist Papers, which are an essential part of American history, where you see the Founding Fathers putting their ideas of what should this country be. And there's some wonderful, wonderful things which stand up even to this day, which are the cornerstone of America, but in the 20th century started to be dissolved slightly. First of all, the idea of church and state, I'm getting into hot water, was never the way we expected it today. Church and state was, you should not be forced to have any religion, and we shouldn't allow the state to force religion on you. You should have freedom of religion. But we've now interpreted that as, we shouldn't have prayers or religious ceremonies in schools because they talk about the Constitution. So things have moved on, but the Founding Fathers, their real philosophies are laid out in the Federalist Papers. For instance, another example is, we do not want a cradle-to-grave government. We don't want socialism. And I'm using modern terms, but they did not want to have what in Europe is the socialist state, where you look at people from cradle to grave. You have to survive on your own, you have to make money, you have to be successful. And so all these concepts are in there back in the 18th century. But of course, it was never clear-cut as to who would win. And eventually, after a lot of back and toing, the government that we have today was created. And the big issues was, should we have a president, yes or no? Let's have two houses, so Congress and Senate, that was accepted. Should we have a Supreme Court? Should we just leave it to the Supreme Courts in the states? Should we have a federal army? And so on and so on and so on. And there were two schools of thought, that some people in the states wanted the power of America to be in the states themselves, and some people wanted federal power. And so, of course, we know the result of this, so we had the federal power. But the Constitution, which I won't go into detail because we covered it already, the Constitution makes it quite clear that the federal authorities don't always have to decide on things. If the state can decide on things, so they should.
And so with all of this happening and being decided, we still had huge sections of our country that weren't developed.
Correct.
That weren't even found yet.
Correct. And so the government said, well, let's try and buy New Orleans. So they sent 3 people to France, and of course it's in the middle of the war, the post-Revolutionary War, and France was bust. Yeah. And they were all very, very happy to collect money from America and give New Orleans, which is irrelevant to them. And of course they said, well, to sweeten the deal, you can have Louisiana. They gave Louisiana to America. So the government met and said, well, what is Louisiana and where does it end? Let's send out Lewis and Clark and see how far west they can go, and bring back some maps, please, because we don't know what we've got.
Interesting.
So that was a fascinating period. And of course, with this expansion westward came this notion that, why do we stop at Canada? You know, why not just take the whole of North America?
Right.
You know, we're going west to the Pacific, let's go north to the Arctic. And so the jingoistic elements of society, the hawks, said, yeah, we can take Canada out of the British Empire, easy. We go, you know, within a few weeks we'll have taken Canada and we'll just add it to America. What they didn't realize was that the Canadians were quite happy being part of the British Empire because they had a government in York, which is now called Toronto. They had representation, which the British government had given to the Canadians after the colonies, the American colonies split. They weren't stupid. You know, they said, okay, we'll stop Canada going independent. You can have your own government. So the Canadians said, we have our own government. We like being British. We don't want you guys to take our country. And so war started. So the War of 1812 started because America felt that they could control all of North America. And it was a close-run thing. There were, the American army invaded Canada, burnt Toronto, York. And in retaliation, the British turned up in Washington and said, you burnt our capital in York, Toronto, we're going to burn your capital. And of course, Dolly Madison just got out the back door as the Brits came in the front door and rolled up the famous portrait of George Washington under her arm, and off she went. So, and the White House was burnt, and of course the legend is that that's why it's white, because it was covered in flames. So that was a real event, and the war kept on going and going and going for 3 years. Baltimore, and it's a really interesting part of American history in that the Stars and Stripes and the Star-Spangled Banner was written by a person who was captured by the Brits on a British Royal Navy ship in the harbor when the British were trying to take Baltimore, Fort McHenry, and he described the success of the fort was still there the next morning, and he wrote the wonderful song. But this war was a complete disaster. Nobody was going to win, so eventually both sides said, okay, we give up. We're never going to take Canada, and we're just bleeding to death. So the war ended, War 1815, and America and Britain has been friends ever since.
And Canada.
And Canada.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Some things can resolve.
It can be resolved, yeah.
Really well.
We're relative friends.
This is great. Thank you for this whole entire session. And it never hurts to learn more about where we came from.
Thank you, Terry.
Hope you can join us for the grand finale. Session 5, The History of the United States to 1815 with Professor Adrian Kehr.